Welcome back to CVM Live. Now for the major stories in detail. There were fiery exchanges in Gordon House this afternoon as members of Parliament clashed over the controversial Cornwall Regional Hospital saga. The arguments and counter-arguments led a frustrated House Speaker Pernell Charles Sr. to temporarily suspend the sitting. CVM Live's Joel Crossgill has this exciting story.
Shameful act of deception.
It was a raucous meeting of Parliament where statements were made regarding the ongoing crisis at Cornwall Regional from both sides of the political divide. Dr. Christopher Tufton sought to refute claims that he overruled the Chief Medical Officer in the matter of having the hospital evacuated.
The then Chief Medical Officer, who has the authority, not me as Minister, he has the authority to issue a closure notice, did not issue a closure notice. He made a recommendation which was the subject of a meeting, after which he clearly stated that a closure notice would not be issued. And I think that is very important for the records, Mr. Speaker, for fear that some think that we overruled the Chief Medical Officer. We can't do that. It's not allowed in law.
Opposition spokesperson on health, Dr. Dayton Campbell, suggested that the minister was not being truthful.
You know, the minister seems to be making it up as he goes along, you know, Mr. Speaker, because if you look on page 3, he says that in 2016 they started relocation of services and 70% of the services were relocated. There's 38 services there are 38 services on the main building, and he's saying that 70% were relocated in 2016. That, Mr. Speaker, is not in keeping with the truth.
The minister pointed to a correspondence authored by the Chief Medical Officer, in which he stated that the notice for closure would not be forthcoming.
Please note that a notice for evacuation will not be issued. This is from the Chief Medical Officer, and he's suggesting that the Chief Medical Officer, who has the authority under law to issue a closure notice, who places in writing that that order will not be issued, he's now placing that burden on me, that I am the one who issued that order. And Mr. Speaker, it is a shameful act of deception for the member to make that suggestion.
Joel Crossgill, CVM Live.
And there was a flashpoint in Parliament today which forced Speaker of the House, Pernell Charles Sr., to adjourn proceedings for 20 minutes to allow members from both sides to regain their composure. The incident stemmed from a question for Dayton Campbell made by Darrell Vaz on whether or not he had a conflict of interest as it relates to the closure of the Cornwall Regional Hospital.
May the Honourable Minister indicate when he confirmed for Central and West, who is the current opposition spokesperson on health, has a contract as a doctor with a private hospital in the parish of St. James, where I don't finish it. Oh no, the question don't finish. The question don't finish. The question don't finish. Where the Cornwall Regional Hospital is located, and as such may be conflicted by his strident calls for the closure or downsizing of the Cornwall Regional Hospital.
Energy Minister Dr. Andrew Wheatley provided an update on the government's bid to repurchase 49% share of Petrojam from the government of Venezuela and PDV Caribe.
I must advise this Honourable House, however, that despite the Venezuelans' promise to send a technical team in short order to meet
with their Jamaican counterparts to continue the discussions and to arrive at a resolution. To date, they have yet to meet this obligation, Mr. Speaker. The lack of appreciation on the part of the government of Venezuela now and over the last 10 years of the importance of this matter to Jamaica, especially as it relates to our energy security, is of concern to us.
Opposition spokesperson on energy, Philip Powell, called for caution as it relates to the publicizing of negotiations.
I'm not too sure, Minister, that it is appropriate that having made a proposal and within the short space of time to almost lamenting that you have not received a response. I'm not sure, given our relationship with Venezuela, that we want to have this running negotiations in public.
A meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow morning to seek a resolution after Petrojam was affected by a sickout today. General Secretary of the Union of Clerical, Administrative and Supervisory Employees, UCAS, John Levy, gave an update to CVM Live this afternoon about what led to staff action.
There was an incident on Friday where a senior member of staff was dismissed by way of a letter, effecting immediate dismissal. And the workers are of the view that the way this matter was handled with one of their colleagues is unacceptable and is not in keeping with established good industrial relations practice. And the workers felt hurt and they felt upset by the way that this matter was handled. In addition, they have raised some concerns with me in relation to new appointments at the facility and what they consider to be a denial of the opportunity to access promotion.
Mr. Levy noted that among other matters, there has been concern about the level of attrition at the oil refinery.
There's an established fact in terms of the company's own annual report, I think 2015 annual report, 2015-16, somewhere thereabout, that spoke to the high level of attrition that has taken place at the facility. And that, again, you know, is something that didn't happen overnight. And for entities that is described as public bodies, a category that the new Minister of Finance referenced earlier in a speech about the reduction in the number of public bodies. What is important to note is that these bodies are units with specialized skills. And if you don't take particular note of the specialty that they provide, you are going to lose them. And that is an issue at Petrojam as well, the rate of attrition. You know, it is, I think the measurement that we saw was for 14%.
Mr. Levy also called on the government to take a serious look at the industrial relations climate, especially in public sector entities. According to him, there are numerous complaints at the Labour Ministry and that the Industrial Disputes Tribunal is now overburdened with complaints. Prime Minister Andrew Holness, along with MP Angela Brown-Burke and former Prime Minister Edward Seago, broke ground for the construction of the Foreshore Estate in Delacree Pen in Kingston today. Private development company World Homes and the National Housing Trust, the NHT, will develop a 230-unit housing scheme off Marcus Garvey Drive in Kingston. CVM Live's Vaughan Thorpe has this report.
A promise made in 2016 is now underway. Prime Minister Andrew Holness, Southwest St Andrew Member of Parliament Angela Brown-Burke and former Prime Minister Edward Seago broke ground for the construction of the Foreshore Estate being developed by World Homes and the National Housing Trust off Marcus Garvey Drive in Kingston. The gated community, to be located on 14 acres of land, will be adjacent to the Tinsipen Aerodrome in Southwest St Andrew, involving the construction of 230 units consisting of starter studios and one-bedroom flats at prices ranging between $2.35 and $3.7 million respectively. According to the Prime Minister, this is also in keeping with the government's focus on boosting public-private partnerships.
Projects such as these can only be done through partnership. The government has to put something in. The NHT put something in. The company World Homes, they are putting in something. But the real success will be what the homeowners eventually put into this project.
However, the Prime Minister noted that housing should not be politicized, and restructuring the country's bureaucratic system to enable efficient and quick decision-making is among the government's priorities, as it is one of the prime reasons for the delays.
And I want you to therefore just stop for a minute and think how many other projects are in the pipeline waiting to come. Sometimes because of, bureaucracy that we put in.
Vaughn Thorpe, CVM Live.
A Portland resident was left nursing gunshot wounds after an reported confrontation with police personnel this morning. The man, identified as Tafari Wright, was reportedly held in the capital, Port Antonio. The police say around 7 o'clock a team was on an operation when they accosted a suspect.
He was relieved of an illegal firearm, and in the process of being arrested and taken to the station, he started wrestling with the police officers, tried to disarm one of them, and during the process he was shot and injured. He was taken to the Port Antonio Hospital, where he is currently being treated. Portland is not the place for criminals to come to, either for refuge or to carry out their unlawful illegal business, because we are dominating the space and will continue to dominate the space. And the series of events that have been happening, especially in the township, is really testament to the efforts that we are putting out to ensure that this place remains the safest parish in the country.
There is mourning at Rossi's High School in Hanover after a student died while on her way to classes this morning. She's grade 9 student Cassiva Sinclair, who collapsed at the Lucy Bus Park. Cassiva had been out of school since Friday, April 13, when she complained of chest pains and was seen by the school nurse and her mother contacted. She was returning to school for the first time this morning when she collapsed and was transported by a taxi driver to the Newell Holmes Hospital. She died at hospital. Education Ministry councils conducted sessions with students. Oh, thanks for that, Joel. Well, on to our story. Human rights activist Lloyd Aguilar is demanding that Prime Minister Andrew Holness address the Tivoli incursion victims in light of his calling for the United Kingdom to provide just and fair compensation to the Windrush generation. This time it's Khadija Thomas with this report.
Armed with placards and voicing their frustration, victims of the Tivoli incursion stood in the rain demanding justice, saying only 400 out of 2,500 persons were compensated for the damage they suffered during the incursion. Human rights activist Lloyd Aguilar says a letter was written to Prime Minister Andrew Holness and they are yet to receive a response.
What we are saying to the Prime Minister in order to resolve this matter is not only that he should meet with the people, but that he should appoint someone, an independent person, to investigate the whole process.
Troy Palmer relived the moments he endured in the incursion, saying he was one of the witnesses on the inquiry.
My house damaged, my bike mash up, burn up, my place mash up, everything, and them only have me like a run around. They just give me a run around every day. I spend more than 20,000 been using by going to taxi fare and bus fare alone. And now I don't have none.
For Marjorie Williams, May 2010 is the day she lost her two sons, 21-year-old Fabian Grant and a 17-year-old Fernando Grant.
The police came in my house and took them out and killed them. It's going 8 years now, we haven't heard nothing.
And Ian Barrett, now paralyzed, blames a police officer for his current state.
Box me in my face from this side and it affects my whole body. Because even like most time going up, I cannot keep my urine from that, even like that.
We asked this resident how much she wants in compensation.
Couple 100,000. But I know, them never want to give you everything.
Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
There's been a changing of the guard in Northwest St. Anne, where Minister of Education Ruel Reid announced his candidacy for the seat as former Member of Parliament and caretaker Othniel Lawrence steps down from his position. Here's Joel again with this report.
former MP for Northwest St. Anne, Othniel Lawrence, who had in 2014 threatened to sue party leader Andrew Holness and Dr. Horace Chang over his removal as caretaker candidate for the seat, has stepped aside.
I'm happy to know that this is a historic moment for the Jamaica Labour Party, in which over the years we have seen persons who have served, and at times people may think if they're forgotten. But I want to say that in Northwest St. Anne, I've served over a decade, and I'm happy to know that my successor and also the Jamaica Labour Party has recognized my input, and therefore today my family and I want to say thanks to the constituents and the hard-working team of Northwest St. Anne.
Mr. Lawrence has now pledged his support to Senator Rule Reid, Minister of Education, to take over his role.
My full support is behind Senator Rule Reid, and I'll be working in whatever capacity he feels I have the ability to ensure that Jamaica Labour Party will win Northwest St. Anne at the next election.
Senator Reid was fulsome in his praise of the performance of Mr. Lawrence while he was in office.
This truly is a humbling experience and moment, but a very proud moment equally for the Jamaica Labour Party and the Jamaican politics. As has been expressed, we have seen a very smooth transition displayed here this evening for the people of Northwest St. Anne. Again, I want to publicly thank our outgoing caretaker, former MP Minister Othniel Lawrence, for his maturity, for his willingness to engage me as a member of the team going forward. We want to publicly thank him for his service to the people of Northwest St. Anne and by extension the people of Jamaica as he served as Minister of State.
The MP for St. Anne Northwest is the PNP's Dr. Dayton Campbell, who is currently the opposition spokesperson on health, Joel Crosskill. CVM Live.
Authority and your 90-minute news program. Jamaica has had a long-standing relationship with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which may be perceived as being the main engine that drives the country's economy. Some people don't think so, though, but it's debatable. The argument has been put forward for the country to step out and pursue economic independence. But is there sufficient discipline within our fiscal space and within the hearts and minds of our politicians for us to exercise that discipline to reach our goal of independence? This evening, we're going to look at the possibility and the avenues which we must traverse to achieve this success. Further, to help us understand this predicament and this possible success, we have the Executive Director of Capri, Dr. Damian King, and Professor Denzel Williams, Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of the West Indies. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
So this is a very interesting topic because we just had the Minister of Finance, the newly minted Minister, Dr. Nigel Clark, tell us that for our exit from the IMF to be sustainable, our politicians and our technocrats and government must exercise fiscal discipline and prudence. We started this relationship back in 1973. In 1996, P.J. Patterson effectively told the IMF to pack its bag and go. They didn't go for very long because they were right back here with us in 2008. Dr. King, what is your take on all of this? Are we able to sustain our fiscal success?
The issue has always been the lack of sufficient capacity in public administration. That the Ministry of Finance, with the best of intentions, just don't have the technical expertise to do all the work that the IMF can bring. And what was the real benefit of the IMF programs of the last 6 years? It's not the borrowing, because there was actually very little borrowing that came from it, and that it was concessionary. The real benefit was the technical expertise that they were able to bring to say that if this is your target for debt reduction, this is what the primary surplus needs to be. These are what are the other conditions you need to put in place. So what Minister Clark was talking about when he spoke about the need to achieve economic independence, he's saying that now we need to take these fiscal improvements and embed it in how we conduct our affairs. We need to institutionalize these improvements in the measures so that we can, in fact, conduct our fiscal management and monetary management on our own without relying on outside help.
Okay, Professor Williams, there's a view that our problem has not really been our ability to manage. It has been our lack of will to manage because we cede to the politics of scarce benefits. So funds which should have been used to develop Jamaica really were used to play into the political game. We've been blessing a few with our scarce benefits. Is that so?
Well, let me just go back to exactly what where Damien started off, because that's exactly the point, really. The purpose of having the IMF was not so much just to get money, but it's really to provide you with the technical assistance, to provide you with the confidence that people need to say that, listen, you're disciplined enough to do the things that you want to do. So your argument about the observations as persons would have made is really coming from an argument of lack of discipline. So we don't have the discipline in order to continue the things that we say we're going to do and to do them well. And a part of that is also linked back to the skills training that Damien spoke about. You lack the technical capacity, you lack the managerial oversight, you lack the discipline. So therefore, the ills that you have just spoken about, they become manifest in our society. So a big part of this independence game that we're talking now is to really have, in a sustainable way, the technical and managerial capacity to do the right things once and for all.
Well, what I'm hearing then, that the path to economic independence is not really an economic path at all. It really is possibly a political path and certainly a technical capacity path, which is of course being driven by the politicians' desire and will to put the right people in place and allow them to make the right decisions.
Indeed, and one of the interesting shifts that has really taken place within the current administration, as evidenced by, but not solely, around the recent cabinet reshuffle, which one can interpret as being a shift from purely political decision-making towards technocratic decision-making.
This thing about a level playing field, though, Professor, the IMF has alluded to it, if not having outright said it, that we tend to create opportunities just for a few people. While there is an acknowledgement that we need to create more opportunities for the private sector, is the playing field level? The IMF also acknowledges that we don't have enough financing for small business.
Right. Well, on the issue of a level playing field, listen, what you have to do, you have to make sure that people are given the opportunities, are given the space to create the opportunities for themselves. And a significant part of the problem that we have has to do with our, what I would say, our skill set in terms of our labor force, for example. Take this. We have about 1.2 million people in our labor force, and only 20% of those people can actually be mobile in a serious way, because only 20% have real skills training. 20% of our labor force have tertiary education, for example. Without that sort of capacity, it is going to be difficult irrespective of what you try, except for handouts, which I know Damien don't like. Except for handouts, you're not going to get many people having the same opportunities. So what you need to do is to give them the right resources so that when the opportunities are created, they can take these opportunities. A big part of leveling the playing field is to make sure that people are upskilled. And once you start to upskill people, when opportunities come, they will take these opportunities.
But what I hear you saying is the opposite of what I hear the politicians saying. So recently, well, former Minister of Finance, Arlie Shaw, he's now the Minister of Farming, really, and he said that he wanted to take the money in the dormant accounts and give it to MSMEs. So essentially, he wants to throw money at MSMEs.
I want to say something on that. I want to say something on that, because that's the issue. If you really take a deep dive at this issue about money for SMEs, and you're starting to look at it more seriously, you know, it's not a financing problem that SMEs have, you know. It is a capacity to access the financing. Because when you started to, I did a study some time ago, I think maybe 3-4 years ago, and we have almost $1 trillion in all sorts of funds that are available to MSMEs.
Not being accessed.
Not being accessed. And you know the main reason? Because they do not have the technical capacity to go out and access these. They don't write the right business plans. They don't make the right pitches. They don't make their accounts are not up to date, so they can't go and access these things. When you check and say, where are your accounts to show me how your business has performed over the last 5 years? Nobody has any accounts.
So it doesn't sound like we're on the path to economic independence, because the politicians are not saying the things in keeping with the path that you're describing in terms of developing the technical capacity and sticking to those technocratic decisions.
Well, as Damien just said, you see, sometimes leaders have to be led. And what you really need is to have the right people in the right place, making the right decisions, and enough of us can lobby them to say, this is the decision, this is the data-centric decision that we're making, and this is how we're going to proceed. A significant part of what the IMF has come here to do is exactly that. The IMF has said, listen, you have been going on a long time with the fiscal profligacy and all of that. What we're going to do now is to force you to manage in a more fiscally prudent way.
But are we being unfair?
It's interesting, if I just can take off on that point.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we conducted ourselves fiscally by running huge deficits. That is to say, not having enough revenue to meet the government's expenditure for a dozen years since the turn of the century. Fiscal deficits equal to 6% of GDP. When we signed the first IMF program in 2012, well, the most recent one that was successful,
2013.
the budget was balanced in 1 year flat.
Correct.
We went from a 6% deficit to a balanced budget in 1 year. So it was really an exercise in arithmetic. Okay?
Is it more than that, though, Dr. King, an exercise in arithmetic? Are we being too hard on our politicians because we don't have know-how with regard to certain things? You mentioned funding, financing for small business, but what about the other things that we've been unable to achieve? Why have we only grown 0.9? We hear we're not doing enough with regard to agriculture, and we hear a lot of things that the IMF has pointed out to us.
The reason why we have struggled with economic growth, why we've been a stagnant economy for nearly the entire time since independence, except for the first few years, is because the measures that are now being taken, that started to be taken 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and have carried through now for 2 administrations, this has never happened before. Okay? And what you see already is tremendous signs of increased economic activity. The headline GDP figure has not responded yet, but you have to realize that the headline GDP figure is only one perspective, is only one crude measure of what is happening in the economy. When you look at employment, it's expanding. When you look at the demand for cash, it's expanding. When you look at demand for petrol, it's expanding. When you look at the amount of construction activity, it's expanding. So now that we have started to take those measures, we're starting to see the response of the economy. The reason why it has not before is because we didn't do these things.
And the big point is that people respond to incentives. So these measures, what they do, they create now incentives that people can actually act in a productive way. And as Damien is saying, for the majority of the 50-odd years of independence, we have not put in the measures that will incentivize people to want to act.
So when you say measures, you're speaking of policies. So you are of the mind, like-minded to the IMF, which feels that we should put in some policy to drive growth.
Well, but it's not an IMF issue, you know. It is a macroeconomic issue. So the issue is that you have to incentivize people to work in your economy, and they will incentivize and produce. A producer is not going to go out and expand his business if he's not seen an incentive to do that. Yes? A businessman is not going to build an extra plant if they can't see an incentive to do that. And all these policies that the IMF is actually saying that we should actually follow, they are trying to incentivize us to do those types of things.
Let me give you one example. If you're in an economy which for decades has been suffering from an inflation rate that is 12, 15, 20% a year,
right,
then, and you have a little cash available, what you do is you buy a piece of real estate and just watch it inflate in monetary value year after year. Now that our inflation rate is down to 3, 4% per year, you actually have to find some real investment to put that money into.
You have any suggestions?
Oh, did you go to the
I was actually off
Expo Jamaica?
but tell us about it.
Okay, there are a lot of interesting, creative, energetic ideas coming out of that.
And that is why you would have seen the equity market starting to behave the way that they're behaving. Because as Damien is saying, there are not many other opportunities now available that you are now fixing the stability in the Jamaican economy.
So what about the counter-argument that you hear persons talk? There's some residual discussion about the IMF being part of the Washington consensus, and they're really pushing Jamaica into some kind of neoliberal orthodoxy.
So let me go again. Employment is expanding, construction is expanding. There's clearly more economic activity going on. Label it however you want. We're clearly moving towards the outcomes that we would like. Of course, you know, there's a lot more to be done.
Well, before you label it, Howard Mitchell, head of the PSOJ, and even, again, Audishard said it, and the administration has said it, is that the PIOJ is actually getting it wrong, and the growth is actually more than the 0.9% that Ashley mentioned. Is it that we should look at it differently?
Well, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, the national accounts that produces the GDP figure, as I indicated before, is a very crude measure of what is going on. It has a strong bias towards goods, tangible output. And in an economy where 3/4 of your value is created in services, you know, it's very easy for the GDP to be late to pick up what is going on. But ultimately, all of these things are connected. So ultimately, it's going to show up in even a crude measure such as GDP.
Professor, IMF head Christine Lagarde warned the world basically when she said that global negotiations, global trade wars, global debt puts us all at risk, especially countries such as ours with high public debt. And she said that within the context not only of what is going on the international landscape with regard to trade wars looming, but with regard to the fact that GDP internationally is at an all-time high, 225%, which we, emerging markets, would account for the majority of that debt. How do you see us?
Well, I mean, there is no doubt, that a closed economic system is not the most efficient way of distributing goods and services. So therefore, if countries starting to put up barriers to trade and stuff, it is definitely going to have an impact on economic growth. It is going to have an impact on trade. It is going to have an impact on your daily lives.
What about our ability to manage?
Well, it's going to be difficult. Because if you can't trade the things that you do, as you would appreciate, we're a small economy and we can't consume everything that we produce. And if we try to just produce for the local economy, our cost of production will be so significant that it's almost impossible to sell it here alone. So therefore, you need a bigger space within which to produce and sell so that you can bring down your overall cost of production. So if you start putting up barriers and stuff like that, it is clearly going to impact on even your basic daily lives.
Gentlemen, within that context, I have to ask you for your outlook. The Minister of Finance has told us that we need to exercise more discipline upon this exit from the IMF agreement. What is the prognosis and what is going to be our healer?
I'm going to use one stone to respond to that and to take off from where Denzel left us.
Sure.
It has always been true that, a propitious global climate, and global economy is always helpful. Yeah. But it has always been the case that the economic fortunes of a country depend critically on what that country does. At the time when the global economy was booming over many instances in the last several decades, Jamaica was stagnant. While Chile boomed and Botswana boomed and Venezuela collapsed. It is what a country does that determines its economic fortunes. And what Jamaica has done and looks like it's serious about continuing to do is going to make us do very well going forward. If you look at what is happening in the rest of the region, the prospects for economic growth are strongest in Jamaica if we continue to stick to the program.
Professor.
Yeah. Overall, I think that we're putting in some of the right frameworks. Take, for example, the fiscal responsibility rule. Now that is stipulating, for example, how much your debt to GDP ratio should be or can be. So no more you can go and be very profligate about just spending and stuff like that. There are some structural reforms that are taking place as well, which give you some confidence that, yes, we are putting in the right measures. However, going forward, what I'm still saying is that if we're going to have the type of growth and the types of takeoff that we really need to see, we have to upskill more people in the labor force. I do not think that we can have a labor force that is competing globally in a knowledge economy with only 20% of your labor force having a tertiary education. It is unacceptable.
Thank you, Professor, for that charge, and thank you, Dr. King, for that education. It was a pleasure to have you both on CBM Live. We were talking about our fiscal prudence as a nation.